We can't say the future without AI. I mean, there's no way around it. 50% of workers now believe AI is going to improve their experience. When I come into the meeting room, I need a way to incorporate my AI with what's going on in the meeting. It's almost a bring your own AI type of a concept. Most of what we do in our day-to-day is going to change significantly.
Hear the latest AV trends and predictions in this episode of Crestron's Smarter Spaces podcast on your preferred podcast platform.
Back in the day, I had a Packard Bell computer, and it was a great computer. It worked great until it needed an upgrade to its memory. So I go to buy memory. That memory doesn't fit that motherboard because Packard Bell had a proprietary motherboard. And then I had to get a motherboard or a new motherboard. And then that didn't fit in the chassis because they had a proprietary. And the whole thing ended up, I just had to get a whole new computer. And it's the same thing. We can have company XYZ from beginning to end, but if one thing goes wrong, and they can't just easily replace it with something that's readily available or something that might have a feature that fits my business need better than the feature of company XYZ, it's going to be a problem.
Al, can you replace that light bulb in the kitchen?
What does it look like I'm doing?
Driving ESG in AV, Microsoft is splitting off teams and forcing UC interoperability. All that and more next on AV Week. This is AV Week, episode 660, recorded Friday, April 12th, 2024. Sustainable AV. This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information we have gathered. First and foremost, Dawn Mead. We can't tell you where she works, but she's awesome. How are you, ma'am?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for having me, Tim.
Absolutely. Also with us is Brittany DeCesare. Brittany works with Control Concepts and with my buddy Steve Greenblatt. How are you, ma'am?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Also with us, he's not old, a person I have known for a long time, Joe Andrulis. I gotta watch saying that, dude. Joe Andrulis, who is at Biamp. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Tim. You got to own it. So it's good to see you. We're holding up well.
There we go. Depends on the day. First story comes to us. Microsoft is Teamsless, sort of. It's the headline I wrote because it was snarky. Microsoft to offer Teams as a standalone app globally amid antitrust concerns. They have announced plans to separate Teams from Office 365 suite and offer it as a standalone app around the world. Now, this is after they did that in Europe, in the European Economic Area and Switzerland in October, just a couple of months after the European Commission started investigating whether the bundling of Teams with Office 365 violated its competition rules. Under the new lineup, customers can choose from plans that range from $475 a month to $54.75 per user per month. So $5 up to $55 per user per month. Despite the separation, analysts believe that the impact on Teams' user base will be minimal, as the platform has become deeply embedded in company workflows. According to data from digital analyst Sensor Tower, since Teams was unbundled from Microsoft 365 and Office 365 suites in Europe last October, the platform's user base has remained relatively stable. Dawn, we'll start with you on this. What does this mean to the video conferencing in the UC market now that you can get Teams separate or you can get 365 separate?
I mean, I like the idea, obviously the antitrust, that says it all. If multiple nations are saying, hey, you're violating antitrust laws, then you're probably doing something wrong. But the idea of having choice, and I know that's a rot topic in the United States and elsewhere these days, among many things, but choice of what you're using, choice of what you prefer is a very big deal. And I like the fact that now we have that choice. If we really hate Teams or we really love Teams but aren't on Microsoft, we have that option that we can then add it in, as opposed to, well, this is what you have and you're locked into it and suffer. So I rather like this.
All right, Brittany, same kind of question is, what does this mean for the market? That is roughly 200 strong. I mean, there's about 200, 220 various video conferencing systems, and that is, Teams is a collaboration and a video conferencing system.
Well, I'm not surprised to see that they didn't see much of a change in Europe once they did this, because they've already had companies totally ingrained and bought into it. It takes a lot to switch over once you're bought into a solution. So I think the change that they would look at seeing is likely happening a year plus outside of making this change. So I do want to state that. But I do like the option of choice. I do like what this means for companies who are simply using the Teams platform because it's already included in their bundle, right? And maybe this gives them the opportunity to explore other options. I think that's a fantastic thing to consider. On the other side of this, as a small company, we have to offer both Zoom and Teams meeting options because of our clients not being able to join one or the other. And so for this, that means we now have an added cost to be able to do business effectively. So I think it's, you have to consider the impact that this is going to have on users who now I've got to figure out if it's worth the added cost to allow for that, and what that means. But overall, I think this is a great move because from a business strategic standpoint, they've already got everyone ingrained. So let's get more money for it.
So Joe, this digging into this story this week, this was originally bought by the original complaint to the EU was brought by Slack. I'm not saying this was a strategic business move on Slack's part, but it seems that way. And it's not the first time Microsoft's gotten their hand slapped for bundling things. I am old enough to remember when Internet Explorer, which is quite frankly the worst internet browser in the history of the world, was bundled with the Microsoft operating system, which in effect killed Netscape, right? And this is 25 years ago. And the U.S. government brought antitrust charges against them, this, that, and the other, and they had to separate that. But to Brittany's point, they were already in people's use cases at that point, right? They were already in the flow. Kind of what we're feeling here, where Teams is already in the flow. You already got your stuff. What sort of opportunities does this bring, separating Teams, this one platform, from the rest of the Microsoft suite?
I think it will have way less importance than people might wish it did. I understand the antitrust objective. I do think that would be true if all Microsoft were doing was bundling the Teams subscription with Office 365, which they clearly were doing. But the important connection is much, much more meaningful. Teams is integrated. It's not a standalone component of Office 365. It is an integrated component of 365. And so if you're on Office 365, it really isn't whether you like Teams better than you might like some, Zoom or Google Meets or something like that. Really, all of them are excellent platforms, really, if you use them and you only focus on that experience exclusively. But when you consider the way Teams becomes one part of a workflow inside of the Office 365, you can't really replicate that by saying, well, I like Teams or Zoom better, so I'm going to use Zoom. You kind of are giving up way more than just that experience. And so like I said, I do understand the goal. I think in this particular instance, the important linkage was missed. It wasn't a commercial linkage that was really the linchpin. It's the operational one.
You're not wrong, because especially as Microsoft rolls out more and more features of Copilot, right, which is their AI.
It's binding them all together.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, in fairness, Google just announced their equivalent. They've done, by appearances, a really, really wonderful job of binding all of their applications together using the Gemini version of Copilot, the AI agents model. So I think both of them are going for a de facto type of monopoly across the user experience, even if it's not the commercial relationship.
And not to let Zoom off the hook here when it comes to bundling, but they just announced
They're
their
doing
workplaces, right?
Absolutely.
And so...
And Cisco has a smaller version of their own little ecosystem. So all of them are, it's a good formula. binding people together in the way in which they work is much stronger than through their just checkbook alone. Brittany had mentioned unwinding how difficult it is to make a switch. The difficulty isn't because I know the address to send my check to Microsoft. The difficulty is it's part of the way we do our lives, and to redo my life is way bigger deal than that. And that was going to exist whether or not it came as one on one bill or not.
Hi, this is Jennifer Goodyear
and Erica Carroll
from the Women in AV podcast, where we are encouraged by the incredible stories of women in AV.
Listen in on fun, empowering conversations as we chat with inspiring women, breaking barriers and creating their own path in the industry.
Check out Women in AV on AVNation.tv or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, this actually plays into our next story. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon has released a newly proposed bill that would require unified communications UCC platforms used by the federal government, such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, to be more secure and interoperable. We can have a conversation about security later. We might do that on our After AV Week, but today we're going to talk about the interoperable part. The act aims to ensure that government agencies can communicate seamlessly across different platforms while maintaining high standards of cybersecurity and end-to-end encryption. In a statement, Senator Wyden said, quote unquote, "This means an employee from an agency using Teams could call someone from an agency using Zoom." Might eliminate some of your issues, Brittany, with figuring out which platform. Or send a message to another agency that uses Slack. Now, this legislation only applies to tools used by the federal government, but certainly companies that are going to implement this would also put those changes across the entire user base. That's Tim's editorializing here. There's nothing in the bill that says you have to do that. But if you're making the changes anyway, why on earth wouldn't you do it? The bill could also encourage the industry to adopt higher interoperability and encryption standards, leading to more secure and interconnected digital workplaces for all. Brittany, start with you on this. What would this look like, both from a communication standpoint, but quite frankly, also from an AV standpoint?
Interoperability has been a huge buzzword for the last year plus. Since I've been at Control Concepts, it's something that we help manufacturers do in our industry, is help make them more interoperable. And I think we've learned our lesson about having these walled gardens and making people stick to this one-stop box. They now get to go across different manufacturers and grab their best in-show products, regardless of the manufacturer, so long as they all work together. We helped Biamp do that with Crestron. And if you're using the Tessera Crestron module, we wrote that. You're using our work every day. So I think that this is a huge move. Like I said, I would love to be able to offer one link and they can join with whatever platform that they work with. And I don't have to deal with the issue of texting or emails back and forth at meeting time because they can't get the client to download. And it's blocked. This is a huge move. And I think for the AV industry, it just further shows the importance of interoperability and not trying to be all things to all people. Do what you do best and work with the other people who do what they do best to control what you do. I think it's so important to stop boxing our clients into everything. And we've learned that when one goes down and we're all bought into the one, we're stuck. So I think this is a huge move. I love this, and I love the theme that it further pushes for our industry of the importance of doing this.
All right, Joe, Joe used to work at AMX, right? So I'm going to pull on that a little bit because Brittany used a phrase that I have come to love and hate, and that's the walled garden. Now I can poke at you now about this because you're no longer at AMX, but AMX and a number of other control platforms had those walled gardens, right? This is 20 years ago, right? This is 15 years ago. So looking back on that, and hindsight being 2020 and where you are now, what does interoperability mean to you in this industry?
I think we've expanded a little bit for the article venue, which was kind of focusing specifically on that service profile and the topic of interoperability more generally. Frankly, I'll tell you, I am a huge fan of interoperability. What interoperability does is expand the market. When people have confidence that, Brittany had mentioned concerns that somebody might legitimately have. A vendor goes out of business, or maybe they don't support a particular functionality that somebody finds really, really important, or maybe it's not available in a geography, and all of a sudden you've got this, you as an organization have a series of little islands, and that makes no sense. How much better would it be if maybe you couldn't get it in a particular foreign country, but you could get another vendor there, and because things were interoperable, you as an organization just carried on happily. In that world, organizations, manufacturers like Biam, service providers like Microsoft or Zoom, compete on other dimensions, right? They compete on quality of service, distinctiveness of product design. There's a whole variety of dimensions that lie outside of standards, right? The functional standards that might be adopted there that provide plenty of space for companies to provide distinctiveness, add value, compete aggressively, still kind of conduct business that they would have, but they've got the benefit of being able to do it in a much, much bigger market. So, I find this, going back to the bill that you mentioned, I find it interesting though. One of the things you didn't mention about the bill, I find is one of the most important one, because it says that bill included integration across, it said other functions, including file sharing, scheduling, live document editing, text-based messaging, video conferencing. So it wasn't just the kind of thing we think about of Teams and Zoom. It was that whole ecosystem. And if all of a sudden, I could be using, Google Docs and then easily exchange documents with Microsoft, live document interoperate with a Word document. Okay, now the game's changed. Now all of a sudden, those multiple vendors actually do have an opportunity to go and expand their market share. As it stands right now, we're kind of being driven to a monopolistic scenario simply because we want an easy way to work across it. And if all we've got is a couple of big major globals to choose from, that's what we're going to do. But with interoperability, now all of a sudden, now all of a sudden the walled gardens do descend. Competition can begin to take hold again.
It is interesting, and Don, I won't get to you in a second, but it is interesting how we started this show talking about the EU driving something. Right. And typically, and this is not a political statement, this is just Tim's observation, the EU has traditionally, in the last 20 years, been the more progressive when it comes to reining in some of the tech folks, right? The fact that this is a U.S. government, U.S. senator driving something like that, it is going to be interesting if the EU Parliament or the EU governing body takes a look at this and says, "Oh, that's a good idea," and then they do something with it as well. Yeah. So it will be kind of interesting to watch. Dawn, this is a political statement, so I'll ask it to you. What do we think about the government doing this? Right? What do we think about the government, in essence, driving innovation here? Right? The government is, if this bill goes to the floor and if it gets passed, and all these ifs, but should the U.S. government pass this and sign it into law, what are our thoughts about the government driving interoperability like this?
So first of all, this is not a statement that reflects in any way where I work, but having lived here in the DC area.
Even though we don't know where that is.
Yeah, well, yeah. But here in the DC area, and even growing up before I moved to the DC area, the scariest words were ever, "We're from the government, we're here to help." So traditionally, it has not always been the best idea. That said, I don't think they're stifling innovation by putting these laws forth. I don't think they're slowing that down, but they're just saying you can innovate all you want, but you have to play nice with others. And, in an ideal world, the government wouldn't have to say that. In an ideal world, companies would do that. They would be designed for user friendliness. And if that user friendliness means I'm using this and I want to use your product, let's make that happen, talk nice, that would be great. But I think you said, 10, 15 years ago, every company in our industry started with the walled garden, the ecosystem, we want one finger to point at.
One throat to choke.
One throat to choke, right. Exactly. And so we've had this for how long? And all it has done, like I think Brittany said, when there's a supply chain issue or a technical issue or anything like that, you're SOL. You can't do anything at that point. So in that regard, the companies, you want to own the market. You want to own your customer from beginning to end. But your customer might not want to be owned from end to end. And if you give them the option, they're going to like you a lot better than if you don't. And Tim, I know I've used this analogy many times over the years when talking about interoperability in walled gardens and such. But, back in the day, I had a Packard Bell computer. And it was a great computer. It worked great until it needed an upgrade to its memory. So I go to buy memory. That memory doesn't fit that motherboard because Packard Bell had a proprietary motherboard. And then I had to get a motherboard or a new motherboard. And then that didn't fit in the chassis because they had a proprietary. And the whole thing ended up, I just had to get a whole new computer. And where's Packard Bell today? They might still exist, but they're not the market leader that they once were back in the late or early 90s. So it's the same thing. We can have company XYZ from beginning to end, but if one thing goes wrong, and they can't just easily replace it with something that's readily available or something that might have a feature that fits my business need better than the feature of company XYZ, it's going to be a problem. So if the government's willing to step in and do this and the manufacturers aren't, then for once, let the government help.
It is interesting the way they read it, because the bill doesn't require vendors to do this, right? So this isn't an edict. It isn't a sort of a requirement. It's like, it is a requirement for the government to only select from people who do this. So that's, it's a subtle but important difference, right? It's not dictating to companies what they do.
The government spends more money than any of us, right?
That's true, but that's up to you to whether you want any of that money.
And Joe, you're a manufacturer. I'm an end user with some ties to the government. So if this were to pass, my company would only be able to buy products that meet this bill's, and if Biamp didn't want to do that, or if another company didn't want to do that, I couldn't buy you. And that would be a heck of a lot of business you'd lose. So in effect, they are telling the manufacturers, or they're telling the manufacturers to write off an entire vertical that can be quite lucrative.
Absolutely, right. Tim's catching me in this thing here, right? I mean, it is a politically positioned so that it's not an edict, but it's kind of a commercial edict, right? I mean, it only a commercial viability edict.
It's not a, you're going to go to jail if you don't do this, right? It's not that.
That would be a little more EU style, perhaps, to say we require it. Here, the government is just saying, only if you want our money.
Joe, that voice you heard was Joe Andrulis.
It's all about the money, money, money.
Right.
All right. Final story here comes from AV from AV Network and SCN. Robert Trebus from D&B Group writes about building a sustainable speaker. Manufacturers of AV equipment are integrating sustainable practices into their design processes, aligning with global frameworks such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by focusing on responsible production practices, climate action policies, and equitable work approaches. Companies are striving to minimize their environmental impact while maintaining high quality performance. According to Trebus, he writes, as the pro audio sector continues to embrace sustainable practices, it is poised to make a significant contribution to global climate goals while ensuring that live event experiences continue to inspire audiences for years to come. Joe, you are our resident manufacturer this week.
Yeah.
So what can, manufacturers do to further that?
There's a tremendous amount of latitude, right? I mean, whether it's sustainability, whether it's responsible sourcing practices, whether it's, manufacturing locations that protect human rights, there's a whole array of different social issues and priorities that manufacturers are asked to consider and should responsibly consider. And, Biamp, it does that every day. What we find interesting is the growth in these, right? There's more, it seems, more audits, more questionnaires on a whole variety of topics, whether it's ESG or, like you said, responsible sourcing and so forth practices that we're asked to fill out. So there's a tremendous amount that we have. The big challenge that I would say is that there's very little alignment among people who have interest in those areas in setting standards. And that makes it really, really tough, right?
So really quickly, Joe, on that, is it then up to you guys to decide what you're going to do? Like, if there's no standards, it's what everybody wants to do. Okay.
We do. And this is a struggle we have all the time. It's like, well, what is the bar? And it's like, well, you kind of set a bar.
There is no bar.
And there's no safe bar. There's no like, oh, here's the threshold, and now we can serve this many different. The government needs to step in and set some standards here. But no,
all of these stories are running together.
They are. They're very related, but in a very good way. They're three very good stories, by the way. I really was thrilled when I saw them. So it would be tremendously. So the challenge really is figuring out where to set that standard, because we can set it anywhere from do nothing to do everything. Yeah. And the problem, of course, is doing everything usually comes with costs. And so you're trying to find this, well, I would love to do everything, but if everybody else doesn't do everything, then they undercut me and then I go out of business and I haven't achieved anything. I haven't done a better job. So there's this game you're playing of chicken almost, of where to go set the line. This is an instance where I feel it would be much, much more helpful to both our customers and to the manufacturers to say, let's kind of set some standards. And if we want to go higher on them, then so be it. We'll all get the result we want. Nobody will be positioned less competitively on that dimension than the other folks, and on life will go. So I love the policies. I would love a little more guidance as to how to go and adhere to them effectively.
Don, from the customer standpoint, and this is one of those things where I'll pull on my buddy Bradford Ben. Years ago, I asked him when they would stop manufacturing things that had VGA connections in them. It was a number of years ago. And he said point blank, when customers stop asking for them. So Dawn, how does a customer, how does the folks that are responsible for this equipment when it gets to site and on a daily basis, how do you guys create a pull for those ESG standards? Get off the standard for a second. How do you guys create a pull for those policies in a company, right? How do you tell company XYZ, this is what we want, or again, goes back to the last story, we won't buy from you?
Well, and again, this is a little different because I do happen to work with a company with ties to the government. I'm not telling. But as Joe said, you need to have the government step in with some standards. There actually are. And I knew this even before I worked where I do when I was an integrator in the DC area. There are some government standards that say if you're purchasing from a company that's manufacturing in these countries, you have to fill out this affidavit or have this affidavit filled out that says that they are not contributing to an environmental whatever, against that area. So, basically saying we're not making crap worse than it already is. Not saying it's bad wherever you're manufacturing, but we're not here making it horrible for them. So that already exists. It also exists that we have to sign an affidavit that you're shipping using a shipping container or a shipping company that doesn't bring slaves over or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of if you dig in to all of the government DFARS and all the regulations, there's a heck of a lot out there they do mandate. And so ESG is one of them. And it's not as firm as though the manufacturers would want. Because right now we're just saying...
It's not a global standard either. That's
true.
You just articulated a U.S. one.
Yeah.
When you're a global manufacturer, you need to go and consider everybody having their own opinion as to that, and it's still tough.
Yeah. Oh, I agree entirely. And at least a U.S. standard or a European standard or South American standard, whatever part of the world standard, at least that's a first step. We're 10 days out from Earth Day. Earth Day has been around since I was born.
So 20 years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I love you, Tim. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's still in a work in progress. It's still going to be a work in progress until we get to that point that either people take it seriously and everyone follows it or not. I would hope that all the manufacturers and shippers and everything else in the world follow the golden rule, which to my view in any religion is don't be a dick. Consider, am I wrong? Consider the people in the land where you're doing your work and then treat it well. Don't be a dick. I would hope they would do that. If they don't, we got to look for standards or something because it is important.
Brittany, why do we need ESG or do we not need ESG in AV?
I think it's important if the client says it's important. And I think there are some clients that don't really care, and they just want to get something within their budget. And there are some clients where this is a core value to them, and they're willing to pay from a manufacturer what it takes to make sure that they're addressing that. So at the end of the day, I think it's great to see manufacturers who are doing that talk about it more. And I think it's going to help those manufacturers to continue to discuss that, to make it known to those clients where this is a huge value, so that they can easily identify those. And I think continue to make sure that it's not risking your quality. Like, I know for myself, I think sustainability is great, but if it reduces the quality, I am not interested. Quality is way more important. So, I think it's important to continue to balance all of those. And I do love what Joe's saying. I think we need to come together in the industry and say, this is the minimum agreed upon standard. And if you choose to go above that, so be it.
All right. Very good. That'll be a good place to stop. Thank you all so much. Dawn Mead, thank you, ma'am. How do people connect with you if they are so inclined?
Well, you can always find me on all the socials, either at AVDawn or Dawn Mead, MEADE, like the fort. Last time I was on, I mentioned something about Infocom, but as it turns out, I'm not able to go this year. However, if you are in the DC area, I will be attending the Simcoe mini show that's happening in Tyson's Corner at the end of this month. So if you happen to be there, I would be delighted to see you.
You can go by and tell Frank we said hi as well.
Absolutely.
Mr. Andrulis, thank you, sir. How do people connect with you or BIAMP?
You can connect to me on LinkedIn easily enough. I am, I think the only Joe Andrulis you will find in the entire directory, so that shouldn't be too hard. Certainly the only one at BIAMP. But also you could email me at BIAMP, joe.andrulis@biamp.com. Happy to take it. And if you are at Infocom, I will be at the BIAMP booth.
All right. Brittany, how do people connect with you and Control Concepts?
So you can go to controlconcepts.net to learn more about us, and you can find my email there. I'm available on all the social media platforms using the handle @BrittDice, and I will also be at Infocom. We attend so that we can stop in and visit our manufacturer partners. So if you're interested in hanging out or chatting with me and or Steve, feel free to send me a note and I'll get you on the schedule.
All right, very good. For me, for Tim Albright, do not follow me on any of the socials. I'm not very interesting. But go by the website if you would, please, AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others. We mentioned Steve Greenblatt and Control Concepts a couple of times. He has a show on AVNation called State of Control, so you can check that out. Also, EdTech and Women in AV. We've also talked about Infocom. We are also heading there the 12th through the 14th of June in Las Vegas. We're doing the tweet up from 4 to 6 o'clock on Wednesday, June the 12th. We'll have more information on the website. So all that and more at avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have for AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.